How about now?
Yep.
Are we good to go now?
Okay.
Okay, I think we got
The
that.
power of letting us know.
I know, thank you for letting us know, I'm telling you, I may never want to do a hybrid meeting again. But you know, that's okay. So anyway, it's our February meeting. We've got most of our DAN team here. One of the big changes that's happened since December is that our colleague Stephanie Fortunato has taken another role within LACOE. We're sorry to lose her, but Stephen Bartlett is here holding up fort, and we are in the process of, I think, looking for a new coordinator for our team, for the assessment team. And then I'm also joined by Dr. Hillary Weissman. I'm Evan Bartleman, project director for accountability and data literacy. And I have my other teammates here, Jeremy Didlin. Another big change, Karina Nahara is out on maternity leave. So we have Marlena Miller is here taking her place as I'm helping out. And Diane Martin is here as well too. So that's our team. And we really appreciate all the hard work they put in to get us going in this rainy day. Quick overview of the agenda. We're going to do a quick dashboard debrief, not too much. You spent a lot of time looking at it, but just a couple interesting things. Then some updates around the local indicators, some important changes that I want to make sure everybody's aware of if you're responsible for accountability or the data pieces that go into it. We're going to do some data updates or releases that are either have come out or are coming out that you'll want to be aware of. Talk a little bit about the ESSA Assistance, that's the CSI and ATSI designations that just came out last week and what that means. Then we have a little special treat. We have a little, we put our brains together here, our assessment unit, accountability and data literacy unit, and our MOS unit, multilingual academic support unit, led by Dr. Sumit Shao, who's joining us today. We've been working around this issue around reclassification and the implications for the LPAC. We're going to try to get some information from you that we can share with the state. So we're going to take a little special break in the middle to do that. And then we'll take a real break, and then we're going to have assessment updates. And Marcus will be joining us from ETS towards the end of the session. So we'll start with a little thought-provoking quote here. And this is from James Baldwin. It's one of his more well-known quotes from an essay called The Talk to Teachers. He wrote, "The paradox of education is precisely this, that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated." I think ultimately this was pointing in the direction of the way, being aware of the structures that surround us that led to where we are. And then also the notion in a positive way that we too can shape the future. Once you become aware of how your current condition was shaped, you can also look to ways to change it. But in the chat or next to your table partners, share what you think. What was the teacher? You're all in education, so I assume you have a perspective that you can change the world. Otherwise, hopefully you wouldn't have gone into this. But what teacher or class made you believe that you could shape the world? So in the chat, take a minute or talk to your neighbor. Well, I still can't open the chat. Does anybody in the room have any particular teacher or class that made them go, "Oh yeah, I can shape the world"? They're willing to share? Or share from the chat? Stephen, what's going on in the chat?
So in the chat, Melanie Lowen, I think is my grade science Mr. Brown. It made learning fascinating. Jonathan Erickson writes, my professor for mathematics school credential program. Cecilia Lopez, my 6th grade teacher. Lisa Viano, Mrs. Miller, my high school biology teacher. Mr. Short, as my high school history teacher, Mr. Wallerman, wished me to do more better. Chad Rose, the principal and mentor in college. Robin Anders, Olive Creek Humanities, Mr. Olson. Lisa Saxon, my 8th grade English teacher, Miss Ringland, kept all my essays saying that one day I would be a writer. At age 19, I was a full-time sports reporter for a daily newspaper for my first Major League Baseball game. Self-propelling, or just recognizing good writing. Writing professor at Northridge for event program, Richard Cheadle, my 5th, 6th grade teacher, Mr. Pacetta, Mercedes and Michael, and that's it.
All right. Thank you for sharing. And I think Mr. Shields, my 11th and 12th grade English teacher, through literature, kind of opened my mind to all the different perspectives. That's one thing I loved about as an English teacher. Started life, I don't know how I migrated into the data assessment world, but I did. But you know, in trying to connect this to our work today, James Baldwin was very focused on race and identity through much of his writing. I think we could be a little bit removed from that if we look at it kind of coldly. You know, we disaggregate data, we look at student groups and whatnot, but I think ultimately the whole process for continuous improvement in the state's model around accountability is that idea of progressing equity through the dashboard and through the subsequent plan, the LCAP and the CIPSA. And we're going to touch base on a lot of those relevant details today. So just as a reminder, we have a number of resources up in Canvas, a lot of links on our agenda today, and I think we've dropped that in the chat. So make sure you look at those. We will post the recording of this meeting after the fact. We don't have a presentation yet from Marcus from ETF, but he's going to send one. We'll get that uploaded as soon as possible. If there's anything else we mentioned today that we don't have listed, we can drop it in later. Just a reminder, also, the purpose of this meeting is to provide all our LEAs with the most recent information in the areas of data assessment and accountability. It's current as of yesterday. Things are subject to change. We may find out new information. And if you have questions, just drop those in the chat, and we'll just try to stay on top of it, pause periodically, answer any questions you might have. And if we don't get to them, we will send out a follow-up Q&A where we like to give you a really solid answer that has references, including links that you can follow up to answer your constituents' concerns. We have 2 more meetings coming up this year. They're hybrid. Sometimes I'm questioning why I'm doing this to myself. I know it's so stressful, but they are hybrid, and I think we appreciate today. We have a handful of people. They're not more than a handful. We have 2 handfuls of people today, I think, who came, who braved the weather. And for a lot of you, I know, probably looked at the freeways and said, you know what, it's online. I'm just going to stay online. So I completely understand that, and that's why we make hybrid available to you. So we have the 2 meetings, March 26th and May 28th. So hopefully we can get you out here for one of those meetings. And then we have a couple learning opportunities coming up. One is today, our charter school symposium for differentiated assistance, taking place at Almanzar Court. And I don't know if anybody on Zoom is going to be there, but we're going to be there. We're rushing down here right at we close this meeting to get there because we have a presentation that the 3 of us will be doing together. And then for those of you who are in districts, and it doesn't have to be a DA district, but on March 6th and 7th, LACOE is having its differentiated assistance convening at the Westin, 2 full days. We'll be presenting there as well. If you're in differentiated assistance, great. If you're not, you're also welcome to come and take advantage of the numerous presentations and other supports that are available there. So with that, I'm handing things off to my colleague.
Right, good morning, everyone. It's nice to see even our 2 handful of people here despite the rain. And for those of you that are at home with like fuzzy socks and a nice hot cup of tea, you know, nice to see you as well. So we have a few dashboard updates that we wanted to kind of share with you here. And I think even before we get started, we wanted to kind of take some time and use the chat here. And so we trust that you've had a little bit of time to look at your dashboard, have some conversations, maybe even engage with some leadership teams or some teachers. Likewise, we have been fielding questions since its rollout all over the spectrum that we'll share with you a little bit later. But if you can right now in the chat, we were wondering if there's anything that you or your district were exceptionally proud of, that you wanted to share with us, that was a bright spot to kind of kick this meeting off well. Take a moment in the chat, you know, was it a student group? Was it a specific indicator that maybe since previous dashboard has improved? But take a moment right now and maybe in the chat, if you can, drop in there something that you are proud of, that your district has done well with. If there's anything, Stephen, that starts to roll in the chat that stands out, feel free to maybe just give us a few. I know we had a few districts that were pleasantly surprised with chronic absenteeism. And although it might have been a slight improvement, it was still an improvement nonetheless.
So one we no longer qualified for DA, and we have one of the schools that fall in JPSI. We try hard to look at things from multiple angles. ELA scores have remained high through the pandemic, comparing 2018-19 to current recent scores. CCI and increases in CPE completion are high points. Elementary ELA math scores were excellent. We are proud of our English inclusion, our progress. We saw some improvements with our SPED group.
It's always good to see some improvement. And I think it kind of positions us well for today to kind of keep that mindset of always trying to improve. With that being said, I know that we have some additional reports that have come out, more so than our typical reports. Yes. In addition to our 5x5, the placement reports, graduation rate, I know that we have three reports that are also quite interesting and have kind of changed conversations. One of which is the A through G and CTE completion. I find this to be a very useful report because now you not only can see the A through G and a CTE pathway completion, but you can see both of them.
1 second.
Yeah.
Does anybody here drive a white Toyota Tacoma? Oh, never mind.
Sorry for the small break. So looking for the car lights must be on. Okay. Getting back to our reports, we also now have the summative LPAC and alternative LPAC participation rate. And this report displays the percent of English learners and students tested on summative LPAC. Lastly, one of probably my favorite reports, but also the one that generates the richest conversation and dialogue with our LEAs is that student group report, which allows you to get that broad overview of all of your students and indicators. I find that one works exceptionally well when it's also, you're able to toggle back and look at 2022 as well to see any of that progress with groups. Likewise, I know that the DAN team wanted to share, we had it last year and it was, I believe it was the most popular and utilized visualization from our friends at the San Bernardino County Office of Ed. And this year is the updated visualization we call the Dashboard at a Glance tool. It's linked to you in the presentation. What's nice about this is not only are you able to look at your charters and your schools and your districts, but it's really a glance once again at the students and the indicators throughout your entire LEA. What we want to encourage is when you're looking at this in the upper right-hand side, you can toggle to the 2022 versions that you're able to compare and contrast what you're seeing with regards to student performance. Okay, so we've kind of linked that to you for another little handy tool to use. And likewise, we want to make sure that the additional resources that have come out are at your fingertips and available. I'm sure you've looked at them, but if not, kind of curated them in this one spot. So of course we have the toolkit, which is everything that's a flyer, a PDF. There's also some standalone videos that are great for engaging educational partners. I also think that the 2023 Connecting CalPads to the Dashboard Handbook is great when you are trying to either learn CalPads, understand how one system feeds into the other, but that is a great resource that will help to answer some questions for you. Additionally is the Dashboard Tech Guide, which can be accessed online, or you can download it like myself and kind of stack each of those mini guides so that they're at a fingertips reach, kind of give you that overall breakdown of business rules, the calculations, and the history associated with the dashboard. As we move along to some updates to the local indicators, kind of get us starting to think here. I know the state board, they approved the performance standards, which are pretty straightforward and consist of the 3 separate but very important components, which we know include the annually measuring progress and meeting the requirements of a specific LCFF priority. But we very much want to highlight, as you can see there in the red, additionally, that these reports are to be reported as part of a non-consent item at the same public meeting in which the LCAP is adopted by the local governing board. And lastly, there is just reporting results to the public through the dashboard, using the reflection tools for each local indicator. And I know that we'll be speaking to those in depth in a little bit. To extend upon that, there have been updates in the self-reflection tools that are now on the local indicator page for you to be aware of and to review, that we've linked here. The key takeaway is not to complete the updated self-reflection prompts, but also to present them to your local governing board, as I mentioned previously on the slide, at the same meeting that your LCAP adoption is taking place. Otherwise, you're going to be deemed as not met for the 2024 dashboard. And as we start to get into the next sections here, I know Evan's going to kind of jump in and give you some of the nitty-gritty.
Thank you. So yeah, we have some updates we really wanted to highlight. First is around local priority 1, and I'm sure everybody remembers last year when we had, oh, hey, we're gonna have this teacher assignment monitoring data that'll be auto-populated on the dashboard. And there's a lot of hemming and hawing, well, what do I do if it's not published yet? And of course, it gets published on June 30th, the day before your LCAP is due. So I think a lot of people were they were doing the best they could. They're putting in data from their, from CalSCHLS, which the HR people have, or directly from their HR team. But this year, the expectation is, and the guidance has changed, you're supposed to use that data that's going to be in the teacher assignment monitoring data that will be uploaded automatically to the dashboard. And if it's not out, they specifically want you to know, if it's unavailable, go to your board without that. And then as soon as the data is available, you need to go back and present that to your board. So that's one of the important changes to note. And just to be consistent, you don't have to have that specifically in the LCAP, just to be clear. The LCAP is different than the local indicator, but because you want to have some continuity, probably good to have something akin to that. But yeah, the local indicators, you do have to take the TAMO data specifically. Update to priority 6, the school climate indicator. There are a couple of changes that took place first last year when they made it the requirement that you administer the survey to your students annually. So that was one change at least every grade level that you serve. And then they added also that the report had to be disaggregated. The student groups had to be disaggregated by those student groups that are outlined in Ed Code 52052. Now, after this came out, people put their heads together and they said, this could be actually kind of difficult, particularly in light of a couple of things. Number one, things like the Healthy Kids Survey, which a lot of folks use, uses anonymous data. So how do you disaggregate, right? And so the Healthy Kids Survey does have some changes that allow them to disaggregate the data. And it comes in the form of questions that they ask the students that are voluntarily answered. So it's not perfect correlation. You're not getting the student ID and connecting it to their demographic data, but they can do a proxy for a lot of these through questions. But you'll definitely want to know that some groups that you have to report out on may not be available. So they amended this tool in the last board meeting in January to say that you'll report out on those groups when the data is available. So they acknowledge that there can be challenges, particularly with an anonymous survey, that make it difficult for LEAs to report out on certain student groups, and certainly student groups of a small size if you're reporting out on a group that's pretty small. And along these lines, I wanted to have one of our friends from the Student Support Services team here at LACOE, Dr. Edwin Yao, join us to tell us about an opportunity that exists for LA County, both charters and school districts. Edwin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Let me share my screen. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
See if I have let me try this. That's not working. Give me a sec. You know what? Let me try that again. Perfect. Thank you, Evan, for having me here. I wanted to skip this slide because you just covered it. There is that annual mandate for the school climate survey. So you mentioned the pitfalls of what it looks like to be able to identify versus having an anonymous survey response. Here are some of the pros and cons, right? On the left, you'll have the anonymous surveys. Well, you have more, higher percentage. It might be more honest if they're more comfortable talking to not a specific person. And then it's also more of a macro approach, right? You're able to see the data, see how that addresses your tier one concerns. And then if you're identifying it, you'll have a lower percentage of honest answers. You'll be able to respond, but with that comes also a lot of liability questions and things like that. So there are lots of pros for either of them. One thing to also consider that we are sometimes talking about is active versus passive consent. What does it mean when we are having surveys for 12 and up? That means that they're allowed to not have to opt into every survey. They can have an opt-out process. Whereas for the younger ones, for 12 and under, for sixth grade and under, all parents have to be informed and actively consenting to surveys. And so this is the CalSCHLS opportunity that us at LACOE are opportuning at no cost through our friends at West Ed. So for the California Healthy Kids Survey, which you all are super familiar with, here are some of the benefits. If you are all already doing it, I think we have 43 districts out of the 80 or so that are registered to do the California Healthy Kids Survey. But here are some of the benefits. We're utilizing it across the state. I want to highlight that point, that fourth bullet point, where it allows for countywide and state comparisons. And I'll walk through a little bit of the data. I know I don't have too much time, but if you want this presentation too as well, or you want to meet with me too as well, I'll drop my email in the chat as well too. There's also a new behavioral health support module. So this module allows us to measure some of the things that are listed here. So a lot of safety things, responses to trauma, self-care behavior. And so you kind of see as a school, as a district in your area, should we provide certain programs to address certain topics. Here's a little bit of our suicide trends over time. I won't go into it. I'm going to skip over it. What you're noticing too is this, as we said, it's across the county, and our response rate of participation is 32%, which I think could be, we are increasing that. At least in this next year, it'll be higher. There's also school climate indicators, right? So you'll see certain questions that relate to certain categories, and there's also a list of specific questions that will align with with certain topics. In your resource folder, there's also a how to utilize the California Healthy Kids Survey to align with LCAP. So that's a really good resource for you all, especially you on this room. I'm going to skip forward. There's also additional mental health reports as well. So here's an example, right, from responses where if you're looking right here at social emotional distress, you could look at them from certain grade levels, right? So grade 9, grade 11, other topics might be considering suicide. You might want to consider looking at certain responses. You might want to consider a screener tool, chronic sadness. So this is where the funding part comes in, right? This is what do I do next? What are my next steps? Am I interested in this? Am I one of the 43 districts? We at LACOE partnered with a lot of our friends listed at the top. We are the third party administrator of the funds, but we are providing the service for the California LACOE survey at no cost for the next 2 years to the 2025 school year. So it also includes consultation, technical assistance with West Ed workshops that are coming in. You'll either get the report or access to the dashboard. And if you already have access to one or the other, it'll be we'll take care of the bill after the invoice. And so with that QR code here, or that link down here, you're allowed to just go ahead and register yourself or your district as a contact coordinator for California Healthy Kids Survey. What's going to happen is they're going to invoice LACOE, and we'll be looped into as well. And support you through all that. I'm gonna count to 3 and lead that QR code for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Awesome. My email's here. Back to you, Evan.
Edward, I have a couple questions. So just to be clear, this is available to districts and charters?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the offering is for charters as well as districts in our county.
And is there a deadline, if they wanted to use this to inform this year's school climate local indicator, is there a deadline to get in the system, or it's already too late for this year, but they can get on next year?
I would recommend if you are that's a great question. Thank you. If you are interested in doing it this year, I would get on that as soon as you can, because a lot of schools are planning to survey starting in February already. But that being said, your timeline is your own, and so if you want to still take advantage of the opportunity, you still can. And we're in communication with our CalSCHLS partners to be able to do that. And I think their onboarding is quick, so it's not extensive process.
There's a question from the chat. It's, does anyone know if the CHAAS, the California Kids Survey, shows data by subgroup?
So to answer that question, I think Evan might have mentioned that a little bit, where with disaggregated data, there might be certain challenges to match certain subgroups. But there, I can get back to you on that for as a Chad.
Yeah, and we'll give you more details. And I think we just met with Leslie Pointer, who's been also working with our LACOE Student Support Services team. She shared with us some of the questions that they use to determine things. So one of the challenges this year, or that's presented itself, is that with universal lunch, you could no longer ask the question, do you receive free lunch, as a proxy for free and reduced lunch and low-income students. So they've had to do some other questions. So what they try to do is, because it's anonymous, to ask questions that then will help ascertain what the student, how the students fit. There are certain student groups, like, they ask about English learners, so they can determine that, whether you take classes to learn English. So they do disaggregate. Again, it won't disaggregate perfectly. And you need to, and I have the next slide actually talks a little bit. There is a limit in terms of what they report out on. So all these questions maintain anonymity, so that's the good news. But because of that, they do have a higher end value for reporting out. So they needed 25 students or more in the group. So if you had a small student group, we know we're responsible for foster youth and students experiencing homeless at the district level if we have 15 or more. But if you have over 15 but under 25, you may not be able, or 15 under 25 who respond, you may not be able to get that data out. And that's understandable. That's why they amended the self-reflection tool to reflect that. But this should help you. And I think one last question for you, Edwin, before you take off. I think this is really important. Could you address, you kind of mentioned having a screener in there, but in your mind, what is the best model? Because there are a lot of people who use, say, a Panorama or a Kelvin on a more weekly basis. And then how would the Healthy Kids Survey fit into that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that when we're thinking about screener, there are plenty of options. Some people talk about Panorama. There's SEL screeners. There's suicide prevention screeners, and so yeah, LACOE doesn't necessarily prescribe a specific one, but one thing that I would be careful of, there's two folds where one would be, do I have the ability to respond to the needs of my screener? And if I'm screening, a lot of times people think like, hey, I'm gonna have to screen the whole school. I'm gonna have to screen my whole district, which I would say that wouldn't be where I would start. If we were looking at our California Health Hit Survey and seeing the suicidal ideation or considering suicide in grades 9 or 11, I might start in a grade where I can actually provide support for that. Yeah, I think it would have to, we have a lot of district leaders in this room. I think it would have to be a conversation of like, let's get our team together. What is our plan? Are we going to start with 9th grade? And if we are doing that, are we doing one school at a time where we have all our support staff together? One suicide screener tool that is kind of the gold standard for application in schools would be the Columbia Protocol, Columbia Assessment C, SSRS. I provided training on that too as well. And it's at no cost. It's a tool. And then again, where I skipped over a lot of the active versus passive consent. So you generally want to consider that for your district too, to make sure that you're providing all the language and things like that.
Thank you, Edwin. And I do think one of the things you kind of touched on too is just the degree to which this data is collected at countywide data. The more information we have, the more resources that both LACOE and other agencies can bring to bear on the trends we see come out of that data.
Evan, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that there's also a through the CalHope opportunities. I think that's the like social emotional learning. There's an opportunity for Calvin Pulse Education. That's another company that's also offering where it's sponsored for the next 2 years, where it's identifying students, it's connected to their Chromebooks or their logins where you can ping them for specific questions. So it can be as simple as what did you enjoy about recess today? Or what is one thing that you want your teachers to know? And from that, like they might fix a basketball hoop or something. But then you can also go a little bit deeper into from this disaggregated data, we can start identifying certain things, or you could there are also a bank of questions that align with the LCAP, align with LCFF priorities, align with the basically how the data is coming out. So if you want to address something for improvement, a specific topic for improvement, or if you wanted to just strengthen some of your strengths, then you can also use that bank of questions to ask some of your students. And so Calvin Pulse, I'm looking in the chat. Repeat the name of this again. Yeah, there's the Social Emotional Learning CalHope grant is sponsoring also another opportunity for districts and charters to utilize Calvin Pulse, which is a tech program for surveying too as well. If you anyone wants to, if you're interested in any of this and you want a little more like extensive walkthrough or just more information, I have recorded info sessions, flyers, and things like that, which I could also email and send to you all. So I'm gonna put my email into the chat.
Yeah, and Edwin, we can make it even easier than that. You just send us that link and we'll make sure we put it in our follow-up, and we'll make sure we put it on our campus page. And we'll get all the information. We're friends with people at Calvin too, so yeah, we're happy to support the work they're doing. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Yao. Good to see you virtually.
See y'all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to kind of wrap up our local indicators discussion, we want to point out just as we go into the 3 components. First you have to conduct go through the self-reflection process, gather your data, look at it, then you need to report to the governing board. So one thing that the CDE last year came kind of scurrying back, realized that, hey, you know what, our system, the My CDE portal, allows you to put in whatever date. There's no restriction. So by definition, you're supposed to have this, shared local indicators in conjunction with the approval of the LCAP. So it should take place by legislation. It should take place before July 1st, but people were able to put in July 3rd or August 15th, whenever they uploaded. So in many instances, the dates did not coincide, and so they got a not met on the dashboard initially. But fortunately, the CDE allowed folks last year to show board agendas or some kind of evidence. So just know that the system hasn't changed. It will still allow you to put whatever date you want in there. You want to make sure that the date you put in is consistent with when you had your LCAP approved. It would have been prior to July 1st. Otherwise, you could end up with a not met status on the dashboard or a not met for 2 or more years, which actually could make you eligible for differentiated assistance. And just want to note, when we were going to help trying to support our LEAs to share the information, going back through agendas, it wasn't always clear when they had shared their local indicators. So we strongly recommend putting local indicators as a separate item on your agenda. So it's really clear to your educational partners when the local indicators were shared. You will again have the opportunity to report the local indicators through the MyCBE portal. The good news is, instead of having this huge lag between the time local indicators are approved and when you upload them as a dashboard coordinator, they've moved it now. So we expect the dashboard portal to open around June 15th and to stay open through August 15th. That's what they kind of pointed to as the window. So you should be able to open, unless you go super early with your LCAP approval, you should be able to upload them immediately after you get board approval. And just note, like I said, I mentioned, this year after they're submitted, there's not going to be a window to go back and edit them. So make sure everything's nice and accurate before you hit that final send. So they're making it a little bit harder, but it should be easier in terms of the timing. And if you haven't, because of the change in the timeline, if you have a current dashboard coordinator, that role should still be valid until the end of the year. But just remember, every year, the dashboard coordinator has to be authorized by the either the superintendent, if you're in the school district, or a charter authorizer typically is the head administrator for the school. So that may come to play within there, but make sure you have someone who's got that status in order to update. And now with some data updates, back to Dr. Hillary Weisman.
Okay, let's see if we can go through some of these data updates. Not too quickly, but just as a review. So let's start off with earlier last week, the CDE was pleased to announce the release of the new 2022-2023 special education program setting known as SEPS, along with the supporting downloadable files. I think the significance of this data is that it meets the federal and state laws around providing free and appropriate education to students in a least restrictive environment to the maximum extent possible with other non-disabled students. And so that's going to be something we'll look at in the next slide. Additionally, we have the 2022 and 2023 TK participation data that was released. We also have the 23-24 annual enrollment for English learners, from CalPAD's unduplicated pupil count, LTELs and EverTELs, and probably the most anticipated and highly desired is the reclassification counts and rates that have also been or are going to be released soon. This slide right here provides you sort of a glance view of that new SEPS report that you can see here goes well above and beyond the statute. It includes not only the enrollment information for students with disabilities ages 3 through 22 who have an IEP, but it's also able to be disaggregated by race and ethnicity, age, grade span, gender, English learner status, academic year, in addition to the state and county level reporting. So really a very powerful piece of data. Additionally, getting back to and looking at reclassification, the let's see, the latest update here indicates that that report is going to be coming out in spring, and I know that we're going to be speaking to that in just a moment with the collaboration we did last week. But we do anticipate that report coming out shortly, and it's there to support the LCAP process. We've also included an LCAP required matrix inventory that we have kind of put together. And this tool has both required matrix that are aligned to each priority in the LCAP, in addition to the suggested matrix for your self-reflection tools and the local indicators. It's linked there. It is meaty and weighty, but chock full of great information. So with regards to reporting LTELs in the LCAP and on that LCAP matrix inventory tool underneath priority 4, since the LEA, since you need to address the LTELs and the LCAP, you're going to need to calculate their outcomes. And this can be somewhat complicated, and please feel free to reach out to us. Don't hesitate to give us a call, as we fielded questions on this before. But in that inventory tool, you will be able to look at last year's reclassification and the students. You'll look at that against the students that are enrolled, that were enrolled in your program, and that's going to help you to get an idea of your LTELs, since that LTEL, it's not going to appear on the dashboard until next year. So please feel free to reach out to us. And before I hand it off for some PFT updates, just a last reminder that the LTEL at-risk LTEL student level data should also be dropping this spring. And as a reminder, the file uses that criteria that's been outlined in Ed Code 313.1 and aligns with the LEA notification requirements. As we move forward, I think Evan's going to walk us through the PFT.
I just wanted to pause here because we kind of, the LTEL thing is, I think, going to be, for those of you who are responsible for the LCAP, a little bit of a, I call it Easter egg, but Easter eggs are kind of pleasant. I think what's going to happen is because you're required to report out on the LTELs, and there isn't any data on the LTELs, including, really you have the data that identifies LTELs, but under a different standard. So the LTEL standard for the LCAP, and which we'll report on the dashboard, is slightly different than this one here, the 313.1. So you get this list released later this year, but it's not quite the same. It's actually a little more restrictive than what you need to report out in your LCAP, which is any student who was reclassified, or sorry, who was identified as an English learner 7 years prior. So we do want to make sure you know that that's out there waiting for you. You're going to have to come up with some methodology. I've talked to a couple LEAs so far and said, here's what I might do if I were you. I'm going to run a report in CalPads, and I can identify all my English learners who had initial ELAS date 7 years ago. And then I'm going to start connecting pieces of data to it. And you may have the ability to do this within your student information system, but you're going to want to set the baseline data for your LCAP for all the things that you expect to see on the dashboard. So your chronic absenteeism, your suspension rate, your academic indicators, so both ELA and math, and probably science if you can get it. So it's going to be a bit of a task, I think, this year until they can generate their own data. And we had some conversations with some of our districts who were here last week. And one of the things we talked about is some of the things with long-term English learners, you may want to have something like the Kelvin survey to kind of get a sense of well-being and things like that that may tie into some other initiatives you have in your LCAP. So I just want to be clear on that. And if you have questions, reach out. We're doing a presentation on Thursday with our LCAP team where we'll talk about this a little bit more. But yeah, this is going to be, I think, a little bit tricky this year. And then next year, you'll have more data being shared regularly. So Stephen said, hey, it's an assessment, but you're Mr. PFT. And I said, all right, I am Mr. PFT, especially when it's this easy. So the PFT this year, the administration, here's the rules that we've used for the last 2 years. So no changes. That's as easy as it gets. And really, I guess this falls into data because you are required still to report out the participation in your SARP. So people just reached out to me recently. So there are five I won't call them healthy fitness zones because that's not quite accurate anymore, but the 5 tests that the students have to do, you just need to report the participation rate, and the SARP is pretty simple. It doesn't require a numerator and a denominator, it just requires you to enter a percentage. So that's all you need to do. All the information is here to keep you kind of apprised of what those tests still are, but you can just let everybody know until further notice. We're just going with the same administration practices that we shared starting back in 21-22. So ESSA Assistance. Yay, so the CDE, there's actually some good news, I'm not being sarcastic here. CDE released the file, the ESSA Assistance file that identified all the schools were identified for comprehensive support and improvement and additional targeted support and improvement. And across LA County, we saw a substantial drop. Like I'm talking, we have a quarter of the schools identified for ATSI this year that we had last year. So that's a huge improvement. I think somebody noted in the chat that in terms of the dashboard, that was one of the things they were proud of. So a lot of schools that were identified for ATSI last year, it was just impossible with that chronic absenteeism and status only, no change. So yeah, a lot of schools had to address ATSI last year, and so a lot of those schools have now exited. Additionally, we have a CSI low grad rate, 73 schools, and I think this really reflects the removal of that DAS 1 year graduation rate. When the Department of Ed said that, the California asked for a waiver on that, the Fed said, no, sorry, you can't do it, so they had to revert. So some of these schools that are getting a low grad rate are using that 4+5 year on the dashboard, but they're serving some of our most hard to keep in school kids. So I think that's why you see that number there. And then CSI low performing, 76 schools identified there. So we have the planning information, the notification and monitoring requirements. I'm not going to go too much into depth on those things because we're just talking mostly about the data that got you there, the qualifications and everything. But just know that there's a lot of information on the CD website we have linked here. Also important to note that this is a 3-year list. So this CSI and ATSI will not be generated again until 2026. So as part of the 3-year cycle, that was the original plan that got disrupted by COVID, but now the identification will be every 3 years and it will align with the 3-year LCAP. So the CSI low grad rate, low performing ATSI won't be identified again until 2026. TSI, that mysterious TSI, that's supposed to be the little interim one. So we may see a TSI for the first time ever next year, but more to come on that. So just an example of how grad rate is determined. This is actually, I've had a couple questions about this because you see, on the dashboard, we had this improvement, maybe even our grad rate improved. Does this mean we're out of low grad rate, the CSI low grad rate? No, it may or may not. You have to look backwards at 3 years worth of data. So they take a 3-year average to determine your average grad rate, and if it's below 68%, you'd still be eligible. And keep in mind that when the feds declined that waiver, they retroactively went back and recalculated all the years in which the DAS 1 year grad rate was allowed. So all those DAS schools, they had to recalculate, and they used the 4 and 5 year grad rate. So it probably brought that grad rate down, at least in 2021. Last year's was using the 4 and 5 year. So that's what you need to be aware of if your schools are asking. And then from the CSI low performing, this is a little snapshot. They use the three criteria to identify schools that among the schools that weren't identified for CSI low grad rate. They went through and they applied three criteria. So one was all indicators. I'm going to say red because they said for the college career indicator, 1 bar was the proxy for red. So if you had all red indicators, that was the first criterion that they applied. They need to get up to that 5% of Title I schools. That's the threshold. And these are only Title I schools, notably. So after they ran that, they ran the next criterion through, and that's all indicators red with the exception of 1. And then they saw how many schools they had, and this year they had to apply a 3rd one. Last year they only had to apply two to get everybody. This year they need to apply a 3rd criterion, which was all indicators of 5 or more indicators, the majority of which are red. So in this case, you could have exactly 5 indicators, and if 3 of those were red, then you would be eligible. So those were the criteria that were used. There is, however, the ability to exit, even though I said that you have a 3-year list, you can't exit. So this year for the exit criterion, first of all, to exit, how did you exit? You didn't meet the current eligibility criteria, is the first part. And then you had at least 1 state indicator at the lowest status level that improved, that showed improvement, and it depended on the indicator. So if it was ELA math, it had to improve 0.1 distance from standard. If it was LP or the grad rate, it had to improve 0.1 percentage points. And if it were suspension rate or chronic absenteeism, it had to actually go down 0.1 percentage points. So that's how you exit it. So they needed to see some improvement on whatever they had as their lowest. Skipping over a couple, I thought we were moved up, but they snuck back in. So ATSI, very similarly, after they get through done applying CSI, then ATSI was based on, first of all, 2 years worth of data. So they looked back at 2022, and then they looked at that you had to be eligible for one student group, at least one student group in both years. Now, what could change? The student group remains the same, but the criteria that they met could be different. So there's criteria 1 that I mentioned, criteria 2, criteria 3. They could, if a student group was eligible in both years, and here's a little tricky thing that happened this year, and I know at least one district that suffered this. Last year, they only had to apply 2 criteria to get their 5% threshold. This year, they needed 3. So there were a couple of schools, it was exactly this month last year, and the list came out, and then they said, oh, sorry, some of you who we identified as ATSI didn't qualify because we inadvertently applied that 3rd criterion. Well, this year they went backwards and they said all 3 criteria apply last year. So if you got off the hook last year, but you met all 3 criteria this year, you may have gotten swept up. So I know at least one district or one school that wasn't identified for ATSI last year, and this year they're being told they are eligible. They're like, how does that work? It's because they applied all 3 criteria in the 2022 dashboard. So you might have slipped out of the ATSI last year, but they caught you this year. So again, this is how you exit. I won't go over it again, but basically CSI low performing or ATSI, you can get out before that 3-year eligibility is up. So that's good to know. And you do it through not meeting the criteria again, and then improving at least one of those low criteria. So it's frequently asked questions. I think I've covered these. Must the same student group meet the eligibility criteria? Yes, they do, but it doesn't have to be the same criterion, but they have to be the same student group. Can a school exit? Yes, right? So a school can exit based on the dashboard results every year. And then finally, this is like one that I think is a little bit tricky because of the lag time, but will this list be used to determine schools that are eligible for Williams monitoring? So as you may remember, the Williams list is generated by all schools eligible for CSI or ATSI, as well as all schools that have 15% or more of their teachers are not fully certificated. So the first tranche, this ATSI, CSI, will be used, but it doesn't go into effect for a year. So the legislation in SB 114 said that they would maintain a list that they created in 21-22 through the end of this year. So that's 23-24, and that there wouldn't be a new list generated until after the 2024 dashboard. So potentially, if you can exit, if you have an ATSI school or CSI school, you can exit by next year, you won't get pulled into Williams. But if you don't exit, this list will apply to you. You'll be eligible for Williams monitoring, and once you're on the list, you don't exit off the Williams list until they generate a new Williams list. Just a couple things on planning requirements. So for ESSA, you're required to have a CIPSA if you're operating a Title I school-wide program, but also if you're eligible for CSI or ATSI. So a lot of schools, you don't have to be a Title I school to be identified as ATSI, but you would have to then create a CIPSA if you didn't. So there was some alignment made especially for charter schools to make it a little bit easier to use the CIPSA and the LCAP as one document, and that included some rearrangement of the school site council requirements. And then the state has produced these really helpful templates that are aligned to the different eligibility criteria. So they have a CIPSA CSI template, a CIPSA ATSI template, and you can either use those, or if you use another tool, like if you're a district that uses document tracking services and they have their own version, you just want to make sure you look at those to make sure all the requirements are included. And you might also want to look at a few of these links here to make sure, including the federal program monitoring instrument for school support and improvement, to make sure everything is covered in your CIPSA that needs to be covered. including a needs assessment that's really nicely included in the CDE CIPSA template. So make sure all those things are in place so you're doing everything you need to do if you're ATSI or CSI. And then just finally, this noting that this LCAP and CIPSA alignment, the intent is to everything should be flowing smoothly. So the LCAP should inform CIPSAs, they should be aligned and ultimately improving outcomes. And yes, this year we have the equity multiplier for some schools that's got to be identified in the LCAP, but we want to make sure that they, you know, the work that's being done at the site level that's informing the CIPSA and ultimately the LCAP is not putting double duty on any individual school. So I'm going to just make sure you know accountability and data literacy. We're going to move into our next segment with our colleagues. But I just wanted you to know if you need to reach out with anything, if you have questions about your metrics for the LCAP, if you have questions about ATSI and CSI, please reach out to us. We are happy to book meetings. I see a few people in the room who booked time with us, and it's one of the most effective ways to actually just dive into data and your questions. And you know, it's the AMA, ask me anything, and we love to do it. So please take advantage of that. So I'm gonna bring my colleagues up to hover so we can go into this. But like I mentioned, we have a special topic, and I'm gonna lay the groundwork for you here, but it's related to reclassification and the LPAC implications. And I think it's actually bigger than just the LPAC. That's why I think we thought we need to touch base on this. And just to kind of talk about how it works here, you know, and I think this is a good model for how your LEA should work, and hopefully it does work. We are 3 separate units. Our multilingual academic support unit, led by Dr. Sumin Chow, our assessment unit with Stephen Bartlett, and then my unit, the accountability data literacy unit. And we routinely have questions about English learners, and we have to go put our heads together. And frequently we'll go present at the MAP leadership meetings. We were just there last Friday. They had a great lunch. You know, we have breakfast burritos. They have a full spread. You know, I don't know, but we got to up our game a little bit. But we do find that this is the area where there's so much overlap between, oh, what's in CalPads? Oh, what assessment do they need to take? Oh, how does this affect the dashboard? How do English learners? So we're constantly collaborating with one another and trying to answer questions. And inevitably questions arise that, you know, come into me and I have to forward them to Sumin or Stephen. So we do spend a lot of time. And this is what came up most recently. And if you're an LEA LPAC coordinator, you probably received this email and you're like, wow, this is interesting. So this email went out just last week and it said, we're about to launch the window, or the window is about to open on February 1st to the LPAC. You have this many students who received a score on last year's LPAC, the 22-23, whether it was the summative LPAC or the summative alt LPAC, that was the level that met the criterion 1 for reclassification. So they had a 4 on the summative LPAC or a 3 on the alternate LPAC. And they just wanted to say, hey, just be aware, you've got all these students and you may need to reclassify some of these. They do acknowledge that each LEA has their own local criteria for reclassification, but the numbers were kind of startling, and I think there's some on this next. So in particular, the alt LPAC around the state, and you know, it's a small number who are eligible for the alt LPAC, but still they had 81% of the students who were eligible had not been reclassified. They had they received a 3 on the alt LPAC, and 33%, a third of students who received 4. They're just curious, are there some other factors that are playing into this timeline for reclassification? And just to make sure we're clear, because I don't want to be panicked, February 1st passed, but just a couple things about CalPads and the LPAC, right? So these questions have rolled in too. So now that the window has opened for the LPAC, any student who had an ELAS in CalPads of EL is going to show up in TOMS. There's no getting around that. So if you didn't get the ELAS change, if you archived them and they went in, they didn't go in before February 1st, they're going to show up, but they will be removed. And I confirmed this with CDE, ETS, 2 divisions at CDE, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So you are supposed to reclassify as soon as all the criteria are met. So if you reclassify at any point during the window, once the ELAS changes to ARPA, they will drop off and drop out of TOMS. They won't hover there forever, and they won't be included, as long as they're reclassified before May 31st and the data gets into TOMS, not in CalPads, into TOMS, which we know 48 hours, Stephen's at best practice. So by May 29th, get your RFEP in there and they will not appear, they will not affect your participation rate either for the dashboard, because that's another factor you have to worry about. So you can't reclassify between February 1st and May 31st. That's fine. It's just to make sure everything's in order. But we do wonder about what may be the holdup. So I'm going to hand it over to Sumit and she'll talk a little bit about just a refresher around the 4 criteria. So it's kind of a callback to our December meeting.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I feel like, you know, some of this may be familiar information, so I'm going to run through it pretty quickly. But just as I do believe that the work that we do in serving our students, we do best when we do it together, having all the programmatic pieces as well as the data and assessment pieces. It's good for us to have on radar the 4 criteria outlined by EdCode up on the CDE website for reference in terms of you know, when we're looking at reclassification. Criteria 1, which was addressed by Evan and is supported through Stephen in assessment, is the LPAC. So it's the level 4 for the LPAC, level 3 alternative LPAC. And then we look at criteria 2 and 3. We went over that because of the recent approval by State Board and the development of the OPTEL, the Observation Protocol for Teachers of English Learners, right? It's now available and it's being utilized by some of the LEAs across the state for criteria 2 and criteria 3. As we're rolling out into it, it's not the only that's used, it's still a locally determined call in terms of how you as an LEA want to determine that criteria 2 and 3 have been met. There was recently a listening session where we were able to get uplifted to CDE some of the measures that are used, Bill 2 and 3, and OPTEL was among them. But some LEAs did mention other metrics that are used, particularly for criteria 2. And then what was reflected as a group was, you know, coming from an empathetic kind of perspective of a student and a parent who may be at one LEA in Southern California and then move up to Northern California, it is a kind of a moving target where it's hard for parents and students to wrap their head around a system. And so in a way that we want to be equitable and afford our families and our students the opportunity to redesignate, reclassify in a timely manner, and then have access to programs to which all of our students are entitled. It's something that's an ongoing conversation, right, with our LEAs that we serve and our students ultimately that we serve. The conversation that we're going to start today has to do particularly with criteria 4, which is still very much locally determined. It's a basic skills relative to English proficient students. So are our English learners, right, performing at a level in terms of basic skills that are English only, right? English proficient students are performing, and then what is the metric that is used? And that is locally determined, and it's essentially across the gamut. We had a wonderful, robust discussion last Friday at our MAP meeting, and so we're bringing that information to you in consideration as you work in partnership with your directors and your leaders of English learner programs. You know, our data partners are so important to this this equation and this process. And so that being said,
It's on.
is it the next one? This one, okay. Okay, you know, just reviewing that we have a tool that has been developed through CDE, approved by the State Board. It is at this point in process of rollout, right? And something that has been, you know, identified as a way to standardize the reclassification process in a way that supports students in this process and promotes transparency and clarity. We're now looking at the criteria 4. So I'm going to hand it over to Evan for this next part.
And this is where we're going to lean into your expertise. what we did at the MAP meeting, there are some overlap, some people are here, but we wanted to share with you and I apologize, those of you in the room, this may look really small. We asked 2 questions of the people who were at the MAP leadership meeting, many people who are English language development coordinators. What assessment was being used? Assessments might be being used for criterion 4. And so of course we got CAASPP and the CAA were the first jump up, but you'll see iReady, NWEA map on down the line, and then got some interesting ones because there's communication we don't quite know what to use. And so we got some interesting usage. The PSAT, for example, was one that kind of got, DORA was one that maybe is not widely known. Everything saw DORA the Explorer. No, the diagnostic reading assessment people, it's not DORA the Explorer. So those were some of the things were listed. And I would, if you don't see something that you use on this list, we'd love to have it in the chat, because here's what, when we ran, and this list was presented to us of all the LEAs that had reclassified students who are level 4 on the LPAC summative, or the level 3 on the alternate LPAC. They said, what is going on out there? Do you have any idea? Can you give us some information? And so we said, sure, we're going to go out and we're just going to pose this question to our LEAs. So first of all, what are you using? If you see it on there, you don't have to enter it again, but if you have something that you're using for criteria 4 that isn't on there, please enter that. Then the second part, and this is where we're going to lead to, they want to know what may be the holdup, right? So some of the things were noted at our MAP meeting where the scores are too high currently. What we've set the scores at in our LEA is too high. There's infrequent opportunities to take the assessment, so we're kind of missing the timing. There's not any approved benchmark currently for our high school for grades 9, 10, and 12 where they don't take the CAASPP. There's communication issues, system-wide problems. There's not enough emphasis being placed on reclassifying throughout the year, that understand that we can do it whenever the criteria are met. Also criteria for reclassifying English learners with IEPs. A lot of LEAs are still in the process of updating their plans for how they reclassify duly identified students. So these are some of the things we heard, and we would love to hear more, so we can take this back to the CDE to help them. And it may look like additional support from us around certain areas, or it may look like additional support from CDE. But what we'd like you to do in the chat is to answer this. To what degree, and this is if you're in the room with us, turn to your neighbors and talk, and if you have the chat open, you can answer that as well. To what degree, if any, discrepancies or differences in criteria for tools might be causing confusion or hindering the reclassification process? So, is it a problem with the tool? And then are there practices in your LEA that need to be realigned due to the availability of the alternate LPAC? Is there anything that you perceive as an assessment or accountability coordinator that may be accounting for why some districts we saw, they have, dozens of level 4 students who haven't been reclassified in high school? What's the cause of that? So we're trying to get a sense of what additional information. So please drop that in the chat. If you're in the room, turn to your partner and talk.
I'd also encourage you to, if you're dropping a assessment that's not on the list on the chat, to drop in an assessment both for students who take the California the CAASPP assessments that are SBAC based and the California alternate assessments. So two different assessments typically would be used for those 2 different groups of students. So add one idea for each if they aren't in that list.
Sorry,
So we're having good discussion in the room. Again, if you're in the chat, please drop in. If you have an assessment that wasn't in the list, just drop in. Just get it. It seems so.
another one Chad's talking about. Oh, so Allison, we have to start the conversation.
I'm gonna put somebody on the spot here. So it's one of our in-person attendees. tell us what you were talking about.
Foundations and stuff. But then we're
Yeah.
actually conversation about. Yeah. Right. About.
I do think that alternate assessment is a big factor, and there's another factor, which is what's the appropriate level on the cost for reclassification? Maybe that's one share.
I just appreciated that list that you guys gave us. I sent out emails to the principals and really just kept my eye on it. I was the principal at one point and I'm like, I don't understand. People that need to be reminded that these students scored a 4, but nonetheless, I know they have a lot of to on their site. So we just sent them a list. We're like, hey, these students need to be reclassified for that second week. So we're doing high rating diagnostic too. And that's where we're going with it. But I feel like we need to revisit our criteria. So I think there's other ways to reclassify students.
I really appreciate that, and what resonated with me from your share was, in diagnostics and metrics, that students be given multiple opportunities to demonstrate eligibility to reclassify. It's not just like a once a year, because we already have LPAC, that's a once a year thing, right? So then what are the additional opportunities for students?
I see in the chat here that we're starting to see, some trends in here. I see further writes that their issue is finding a tool to meet criteria for all LPAC students who score a level 3. We use the lifestyle measure on iReady for our gen ed students, but our LPAC students usually can't meet that minimum threshold. We don't have something that is norm referenced for them. I also see, Lisa says, I don't see the tools as a source of the problem hindering reclassification. Students who people form the LPAC all have reclassified except for one SPED student whose parent did not necessarily support the reclassification process. We just added the NWEA and Lisa's interested in seeing what the baseline data may look like. I also see that another Zoom link, Sylvia says that they're working with their SPED department on the local assessments that can be used for criteria 4, similar to iReady or STAR for basic skills in English. And lastly, we had responded today for elementary level, low ELA performance district-wide, EL do not meeting the reclassification cut points set, which seems to be a running theme. The cut points are not too high, but we don't feel we should lower the cut points if they're not ready. The second response is at the secondary level, students did not meet criteria 4 in our district. It's based upon ELA grade. Also inconsistent at giving assessments for reclassification consideration. So that's from our Zoom link.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'm very curious, because for the most part, our kids are not reclassifying. It's not because of the LPAC, but it's because of our cut points, our percentile level that we have for our STAR assessment. So I'm curious to see what other districts' cut points are or percentile area for those kids that are reclassifying, if that tool is being used as a criteria for. Now that anybody here is using that.
I don't think anybody has an answer yet. We will, so we opened the can of worms. We do recognize that this is like, we need help. I think a lot of people, especially around the alternate assessment. So we will close the loop here in our next meeting. Sumin is kind of doing a lot of work right now, supporting the CDE in these listening sessions. And so I think she's in close contact. And so information will definitely get back to Dan. Certainly we'll get back to her group, the MAP leadership group. But yeah, we can help communicate or connect districts and charter schools with one another. So there's like some clarity on what people are using. I think that would be our ultimate goal, to make it a little less obtuse in terms of what's needed. Because I do think particularly the LPAC seems to be a really difficult one for folks.
I would definitely agree. I would love if you could put your question in the chat for us to bring back. We are, the MAS team is traveling up to Sacramento, so we really do want to uplift these questions, particularly to the cut points. I think that you're not alone in wondering what colleagues in other districts and other charters are utilizing. And so while it is something that is referenced locally, you know what I mean, to your students, it's a good question to ask and one that will continue to be a topic.
And I wanted to add something else when the decision-making criteria for the alternate assessment is another big question that I have, because this is what we're asking our teachers to use so that they can identify kids as eligible to take the alternate LPAC. But because the decision tool has specific, I guess, criteria for the different parts, a lot of the kids that did qualify previously without using this are no longer qualifying to take the alternate. So that's worrisome because now the kids have to take the regular summative LPAC, and now we'll not have the opportunity to hopefully get a 3 here. I don't know if that's making sense to you, but now rather than having them take this test, now they can take the summative, which is going to be a lot tougher for them to even get to that level 4, where the alternate was already challenging for them. Does that make sense? I don't know if you know, it says part A, one of the criteria is the disability specific to that. And it says if the student has, what is it? Specific learning disability or speech language impairment, and you stop there. And when you get to the end of the form, if you answered that for that particular section, then they don't qualify. So it just, I feel like it's making it hard for our kids to even have an opportunity.
And this is why assessment, accountability, and English language development are always putting their heads together, because this is really exactly the kind of thing. That's definitely something that sits in the assessment camp. And that could be a hindrance, and I think I've heard that from other folks. It's like, you make sure that we have a lot of students who took the alternate before the school.
We went from like 35 kids down to 10 because we were using the guidance that was given to us.
And that was the intent of the guidance, unfortunately, is to reduce the number down below 1% statewide. So, I believe that's intended. But yeah, there are effects of one thing on another, and that will certainly potentially increase the rate of non-reclassification, or the LTELs, and other effects. So what is that LPAC coordinator or CAS coordinator's role in reclassification is what we're going to look at next. And so we want to look at that in terms of this email that went in. And I want to note that email only went out to LEA LPAC coordinators. So if you're a CAS coordinator, you didn't get it. If you were an EL director, you didn't get it. Superintendents didn't get it. This went out just to that role. So it's incumbent upon that individual, that LPAC coordinator, to communicate with each of these groups that are part of that conversation. The EL director, if you're not both roles, the special education director, and driving that understanding with those individuals, and we talked about the qualifications for the alternate assessments, and working with that team and understanding the rate of reclassification among students who qualify dually and qualify for alternate assessments. So very important to be that point of bringing people together for those conversations. So if we look at things in LEA coordinator checklist, this is one of those pieces of information, the sharing that brings meaning to some of those statements. What does it mean to share data? What does it mean to coordinate? What does it mean to be the one who is the source of some information and drawing people together to potentially solve some problems? It was The state couched the information in the way that they discuss it with counties as ensuring that we're reducing the number of stairs cases. But I'm sure you understand the implications for this across the board. If we're looking at other things that LEA coordinators are expected to do based on checklist, special education is one of them, and working with special education as an LEA coordinator on driving those IEP meetings, driving those discussions of reclassification based on LCAP is part of that LEA coordinator role, and of course notifying the IEP teams of the alternate assessment classification criteria. That also is a testing specific piece of information that only goes out initially to LEA coordinators. So absolutely important to be part of that discussion and drive that discussion, like coordinator role. Keep in mind, California Education Code prohibits use of interim assessments for any high stakes purpose, such as course placement, identification as gifted or talented, or that reclassification of multilingual learners, VLs. So when looking at that list, you don't see interim assessments in the list of assessments that are used, and it cannot be part of your list. At RAND, we were also reminded that a CAA as a California alternate assessment level 2, not necessarily level 3, was the level of average performance for EO students taking the alternate assessment. It was expressed by many that what they see as the criterion for level of attaining evidence of proficiency was often, if the CAA was being used, it was that top level, the level 3. So something to consider, of course. Criteria 4 is not standardized. It's not driven by the state, but something to consider statewide in terms of those rates of reclassification of students taking the alternate assessment, that 80%. If we look at the stairs argument for reclassification and this letter, you want to look at a few recommendations here. If a student does test and is later reclassified, a stairs case must be submitted for each domain assessed to remove that assessment record. So each of those 4 domains that are assessed for ELPAC has a separate stairs record that needs to be have a stairs case submitted. If students have not met reclassification criteria by May 15th, of course, we know that the window for ELPAC goes through May 31st. If they have not met the criteria by mid-May, it's suggested to administer the summative ELPAC to ensure that all eligible students are tested as required by law. So you still have to meet that 95% rate to keep from getting a penalty. You still have the expectation of testing 100% of your students with the ELPAC. So if you're running into the end of the window and have a student who had met the criteria in the prior year, but did not reclassify, it's recommended that you start the testing process if you're in that last 2 weeks. Also, it's important to know that the prior year's ELPAC results expire on May 31st, and you cannot use those prior year's ELPAC results for reclassification the next year. So some reminders in terms of the process related to reclassification and making sure that you are testing students or not testing students appropriately based on that list of potential reclassified students that you got. you're the point of communication, make sure you're sharing that out. I believe we move next into a break unless there are any questions before that break. We can try to field those right now.
Questions in the chat, Helen?
Questions, comments really on practices in your district?
Excellent. So Evan, you wanna let us know how long the break will
Let's
be?
get back to 10:35.
10:35, okay. That's okay, we're about to get started here. Am I back to unmuting or? We're gonna go into assessment unit updates. CAASPP and LACOE will have a California high school proficiency and equivalency discussion at the very end, very brief. We'll look at CAASPP and LPAC updates from RAN, from CD and coffee sessions. We'll leave most of the coffee session and ETS information for Marcus to fill you in on, and make sure if you're in this role, you're attending and reviewing the trainings available at CAASPP and LPAC.org, and Marcus should give you a list of those as well. There is a question and answer session for ETS currently going on right now, I believe, all day. And so if you have questions, great to pop into that and ask them questions during their all-day Q&A session. If we're gonna start with something that spans both LPAC and CAASPP, and that would be interim assessments. Want to remind you that they're optional to support student learning, and great for use in the classroom to help support teaching and learning. Great for monitoring progress towards English language proficiency, including administering them in non-standardized ways to support formal assessment process. Of course, not usable for reclassification themselves. In early February, as part of the CAASPP and LPAC interim assessments release plan, SIRS will start to display select individual items and student responses, as well as other item level information in the rubric and exemplar tab within SIRS, and LEAs will be notified once these features are available. Next step in the release plans will include the ISRs, individual student reports. The ISRs for CAASPP and LPAC interim assessments are scheduled to be available in late July 2024. If you want to know what that looks like, you can currently create ISRs for the other interim assessments, the math and English. So moving on, student scores for the LPAC interim assessments and reporting in SIRS. We discussed a few of those things. We want to make sure you are reminded that educators need to be given access to view results if they haven't already. You need to do this by uploading student groups into SIRS if it hasn't already been done. Some SIS vendors have automatic connection steps to do this process automatically, but you're going to need to check with that SIS vendor, your SIS vendor, in order to ensure that you're utilizing that and doing that in a way that's supported by your system. May involve a second step of the LA equivalent uploading based on a output of the SIS. You may be looking for some information on how to use some of the new features, and you may have seen new features, and I'll talk about a new report in a few minutes and a few slides. Some of these new features do not have any articulation in or description in the SIRS user guide yet. And so look out this month, February 2024, User guide is going to be updated with the information about the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. Student group views for administrators, some useful details are gonna hopefully add better understanding and clarity, and you'll get a notice when that's been updated. One direct feature that should be communicated to site coordinators and test examiners about checking test settings in the test administrator TA interface before approving students into a testing session. And that's one way you can avoid submitting stairs reports cases by catching those mistakes before beginning a test. In terms of accommodations and designated supports, the updated California Assessment Accessibility Matrix is now available. It's the document that outlines all the available resources or test settings available for students, often not explicitly clear just by the title of a designated support or accommodation, what that refers to, if it's an embedded resource or has to be delivered by a person standing with a student testing. Those definitions, great source for those definitions. Also, ISAP tool now has links to videos that'll take you out to a description of what each of those resources will do. Great resource for doing that. Very important to make sure those settings are in before starting a assessment. Updates on accessibility resources. There's a new embedded word prediction accommodation for SBAC and CAS. There's new non-embedded print test. Non-embedded means it be delivered by a person or in paper. Embedded would be it's in the testing system and has to be turned on. Non-embedded printed test directions in English language, in English and American Sign Language. The American Sign Language would have a video test directions. Smarter balance of math, embedded designated support of Spanish stack translation is now a toggle between English and Spanish. One of the largest difficulties in accessing a test for English learners, given a designated support of Spanish stack translations, was the ability to access it when they were not proficient in that primary language. So CD is sending now some communications direct to administrators. So great point of conversation and communication with them as an LA coordinator, as a director, or in whatever your role is, driving assessment or that data for that assessment. CD sending quarterly newsletters to site administrators. They highlight topics of importance, including accessibility, interim assessments, resources and tools for teacher. There's a site administrator virtual meeting back in January that happened. Convenings will be a unique opportunity to learn about assessment related resources, tools offered by the CDE, as well as ask questions and share best practices with other site administrators throughout the state. You can get yourself on a newsletter by sending an email to SCOE at scoe.net. Looking at the LPAC, of course, the LPAC system continues to grow. We now have alternate assessments for both the initial and summative LPAC, and as you are most likely aware, the optional LPAC interim assessments are available this year. As we enter the summative season, I'll address some of the updates that we have going into that season. Some LEAs have not yet completed these LEA certification. It is both important for understanding your role and what to do, but it also has been known, we have been told that all of the scores for LEA have been invalidated for a LEA that did not complete the LEA certification. As long as that's completed prior to beginning testing, I believe you are okay, but very important to make sure you get that LEA certification done, especially if you're looking at having results for those scores. So we just now started LPAC testing season for LPAC. Looking at the test administration window, CDE is strongly encouraging LEAs to use the entire testing window to give the greatest flexibility. So starting now, we're starting the summative window on February 1st, a few days ago. That means not waiting to May or April or after your spring break in order to start LPAC, but start now. The obvious pushback is, of course, I want my students to have more instruction prior to taking the assessment. But CDE does recommend getting started now. Only those students receiving daily instruction remotely or who are at home for health concerns should be tested remotely. Another note on that window. As you're looking out into the testing window to determine how much time to budget for LPAC testing, good to know that there have been no changes in the estimated testing times by form from 22 into 23. However, of course, your LE or school may have been assigned a different form than a prior year, and this will or may affect your testing time this year. Notice that by grade and grade level and form, the time can triple. If you miss the primary ordering window or need to order additional K through 2 writing for the summative, we're currently in the supplemental ordering window. So make sure you get those orders in. Just a reminder that practice and training tests, they provide students opportunity to gain familiarity with the system, identify appropriate accessibility resources. In fact, you can apply them on the fly while you're in the system. Interim assessment is also a good way to mimic some of the testing environment and receive useful information about student performance and progress. Looking at 2 changes at the beginning and the end of the testing range for LPAC. There's, of course, we've talked about this several times, a new TK indicator. TK students are eligible for the initial LPAC and the summative LPAC. They are in the first year of a kindergarten program, 2-year kindergarten program. And so there's going to be an indicator in TOMS that is flagged as yes if they're TK, and their grade level in TOMS is going to show up as kinder, even if the grade level is TK in CalPAT. All students in kindergarten through grade 12 through age 21 who are classified as EL and CalPAT must continue to be tested annually during the summative alternate LPAC and summative LPAC test administration window until they're reclassified as fluent English proficient based on the guidelines for reclassification established by CDE. With that in mind, the age cutoff for LPAC is getting a new report this year, and look for an announcement and description of the functionality when that's added to the manual. So that is not currently in the manual. One of the things that will be updated as well, although the report is currently in TOMS if you want to check it out. Just a reminder, we've been talking about this since September Board of Education meeting. Reminder that redesigned initial LPAC SSRs won't go live until next school year, whereas the summative redesigns will go into effect for this testing season for the 2023-24 summative results. That's both for LPAC and for CAASPP. So SSRs will also be available in Arabic, starting with this test administration year, in addition to the previously available languages, and personalized video SSRs are coming back and going to be available as well. Form assignments, second scoring assignments for 2023-24 summative alternate LPAC administration are available on the LPAC website. A subsection of schools assigned Form 2 are going to be required to second score, and then you should check out those requirements and eligibility for employees or contractors in those requirements if you are Form 2 and second scoring. In terms of the launch of the new LPAC interim assessments, they reorganized the data entry interface in a way that hopefully will reduce the number of misentries into the wrong test. Just be aware of that, make sure your staff are aware of that as well. CAASPP updates. So Yeah,
Got a couple of questions before I move away from LPAC.
absolutely.
Let me just, one you may not be able to answer, the other you may, and maybe Marcus can answer these later as well. Is the toggle for translations in student view or test administrator?
I do not know. Great
Also,
question. Maybe, Marcus, that's a Marcus.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's-
I'm here. I've been listening in. What was the question? I can address it right now if you'd like.
the toggle for translations, is that in student view or the test administrator?
I believe the toggle for translations, I can definitely double check. I believe that's in the TA view and this is pertaining to the interims, correct? Or the actual summative?
So one of the slides we indicated that the math designated support for stack translation and
Mhm.
Spanish has a new toggle that will allow you to toggle back and forth between stacked versus absent. I'm not sure how that is going to, if that's under the student's control or a teacher or a test administrator has to control that with the student during the testing session.
Gotcha. Okay. So for interim, I know that the toggle should be available on the TA side. For summative, that has to be set prior to actual administration.
Another question you may answer,
Sure.
when trying to print the interim LPAC student reports for reading or listening, there's an under construction. There is no ISR template available for this assessment. When will we be able to generate those reports and servers?
And those are that's the actual score data within SIRS for which test again, please?
The LPAC interims.
I
Okay,
believe that
those might be forthcoming still at this time. Whoever had posed that specific question, if it's a coordinator, please feel free to send that to the Region 11 email address so I can share that with the team regarding that under construction message that they're saying, because I'd like to double check with my team here. Thank you.
For VC as well. Final question that was in the chat, are there specific dates of when to return the K2 booklets like last year?
I believe there are, I know there are predetermined dates for pickups from UPS. I believe last year's, I'll find that as well, but I believe last year's date, there's not specific dates. You can schedule a pickup with UPS at any point, but there are predetermined dates that we do have on the Summit of LPAC page in regards to returning that K-2 material, that it should have those dates listed as well. Yeah.
Excellent. So moving on to CAASPP. So the state has got a testing window for both the CAA for science and for the CAASPP, the ELA and math smarter balance, the CAAST, the California Science Test, the CAAs for ELA and math, and the California Spanish Assessment. So California alternate assessments for science has got a separate window, of course, September 19th through July 15th. That's a year spanning window. And in terms of the rest of the assessments, the state window that opens on January 9th or opened on January 9th is not necessarily your local window. You would have set and applied your local window, and you may have the CAASPP summative assessment testing window coming up. But looking at that CAA for science, the CAA for science is 4 separate embedded performance tasks that become available every September. And these are administered in any order, any time during the year, shortly after students receive related instruction. So embedded into the year, embedded into the instruction. So eligible students take the assessment in grades 5 and 8 and once in high school, just like the CAAST. And it's important to go about collaboration with CAASPP test site coordinators and test examiners to ensure that all students are assigned per their IEPs. But I want to highlight that structure, the structure of that CAA for Science Administration. because of a January State Board of Education proposal for an innovative approach for future design and development of the California science test. And that innovations concept paper has a proposed approach which includes performance tasks embedded into learning, very similar to the structure of the current CAA for science. And an opportunity that would provide teachers and students authentic and engaging experiences through doing science, and shorten the time that students spend on end of the year assessment. The timeline for implementation is to be determined. They're currently in a development phase of that. They are intended to be authentic, represent NGSS dimensions, involve sense-making of phenomena, reflect and be responsive to learners. And I want to highlight that. If you look at many of the strategies that are intended to make assessment connect with students, the strategy asks that it be part of the instructional strategy of a teacher. So teachers are going to be relied upon to connect students to their assessment. So an exciting development here on the California Science Test. Next steps are pending and will be guided by State Board of Education direction. Moving along to the 1% threshold survey. 1% threshold survey closed back in December 18th, 2023. And you were required to complete the survey of about 2,000 LEAs. 92 didn't respond. So 0.5% maybe didn't respond to the survey. The January State Board of Education includes a letter to the U.S. Department of Education on the timeline of activities that CDE will be using to meet that 1% cap. Of course, this is a state level cap rather than an LEA level cap or a school level cap. So you'll see those things meted out at the state level. However, the tools that they provided, including that identification process and guidance for identification of students for the alternate assessments, though not mandated, are a best practice and intended to reduce the number of students that are identified for alternate assessments relative to prior assessment structures. So if you look back at the time of CST, we had much higher identification for alternate assessments because the criteria was different. Now, if you are looking as a coordinator at rates of, as you complete your survey, the options for if you are beyond the threshold at an individual school is to indicate that you have a special program. If you're finding that you do not have a special program and are over that 1%, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15%, good chance to review policy, review systems, and ensure that you're working with your IEP teams to be the person who delivers the guidance from CDE on identification for alternate assessments. That goes to you and not necessarily to special education coordinators or directors. And lastly, we'll cover briefly the updates on the high school equivalency and proficiency programs, which have gone through major changes in the last 12 months. Most significant part of this change has been the elimination of the CAASPP, the chess piece test, which had been used since 1974. So test takers can now register for the HSE by selecting the test and registering on the test respective website for the HSE program, high school equivalency program. Notice these two different acronyms of two different programs on the left in red: California High School Equivalency, HSE, and California Proficiency Program, CPP. Both tests for HSE program, there are two tests available: the GED and HiSET, and both tests provide an opportunity to take the subtests on a computer, either in a testing center or at home. Both tests provide test preparation materials and testing accommodations, and each has its own guide. Eligibility difference between the two programs, that's HSE and the CPP, is primarily based on a candidate's enrollment status. If the student is currently enrolled in high school, they're a candidate for the CPP. The candidate is not enrolled in high school, they're a potential candidate for the HSE program. To find out which of the programs a candidate might be eligible for, please visit the CD, CPP, and HSE web pages to learn more. GED offers the HSE, all these acronyms. GED is one of the two testing services. They provide the high school equivalency at home, online through live proctoring, or on the computer at a testing site. HiSET provides a test in a paper pencil format that is only available at a testing center. Recently, HiSET announced that all 2023 testing materials must be returned from the testing centers to receive the 2024 booklets. For guidance on that matter, you're going to look at HiSET material return instructions. CAASPP has been replaced, of course, by the CPP, and test results from previous CAASPP tests will not count towards the new CPP, which evaluates the student's proficiency in basic skills taught in public high schools in language arts and mathematics. And HiSET proficiency is now open for registration for eligible high school students who are 16 years of age or older, who have been enrolled in grade 10 for one school year, or are currently enrolled in their second semester of grade 10. And you can visit the HiSET proficiency registration page. Apparently those tests are underway and already queuing up and recovering to pre-pandemic levels. That involves passing language arts and mathematics subtests as HiSET proficiency and earning a certificate of proficiency, legal equivalent to a high school diploma for that proficiency program. There's more information on the CD's website and through HiSET. I believe HiSET is operational currently, and then the GED is coming online. And with that, I am going to give you my contact information. Notice as Evan mentioned, we're missing one of the pictures and people there. You can send general email to the assessment unit at assessment@laco.edu or use my email address. We're looking forward to interviewing coming up in the near future, hopefully, and filling the void with another individual assessment unit and serving you.
One question for you.
Yeah.
Judy asked, and this is good, she called back before the break. Make sure this was answered. If a student completes all 4 domains of the ELPAC summer assessment this year, however, ends up meeting criteria for reclassification, can we then submit a standard appeal on all 4 domains to allow the student to reclassify this year?
Yes, if it's before the end of the testing window and before you get timed out on having all the data processed in CalPaths and get its way to TOMS, yeah, you can do that. The CD is explicitly giving guidance intended to reduce the incidence of that, though, and you should be looking at reclassification and doing everything you can to reclassify those students on that list who have the criterion 1 met prior to testing them. So be sure that you're using that list to drive a conversation that precedes testing of those students. So hold off on testing students on the reclassification potential list, the qualifying for criteria 1, and make sure they're tested by the end of the window if they don't get reclassified, but consider those other criteria and make sure that they have every opportunity to reclassify during that window. Students can reclassify across the year. There's no limit on when they can reclassify, but logistically, you're gonna want to make sure you're doing it before the end of the window and considering it and testing with that other criteria 4 test in a way that allows the student the opportunity to reclassify if they can.
All right. I think next up we have Marcus Betancourt, ETS, our Region 11 Success Agent. Are you still with us, Marcus?
Yes, I am. Thank you, gentlemen.
You have
Yeah,
a presentation to take over sharing?
sure. Just going off of what Steven said and Judy's question in the chat. Yeah, so you want to make sure, again, that is done before the end of the summative window. There's not any guarantee. So say, for example, the student classifies 2 days before the window closes and the LEA doesn't catch that classification or update that classification until like the last possible day before or even day of on the 31st. You can still submit the stairs. However, since it is the 31st or close to that window ending, there's not any guarantee that we're going to be able to process that again as the window is closing. So I just wanted to give you that updated piece of information, Judy, just in case. In all the LEAs, we had a lot of that last year. There was a lot of submissions of stairs on even the very last day of administration, and unfortunately, that is not a guarantee that it can be processed within that time. So it's usually a case-by-case basis. So just wanted to give everybody that heads up. Great. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me just a brief moment. Stephen, as always, great presentation. Again, you staff at LACOE definitely utilize our websites very, very well, and definitely pull all the life out of those stones. Good job on using all that information. So the PowerPoint I have here. Sorry about that, one moment. Okay, let me know when you can see the screen here, guys.
All right. You're up and running.
Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so just as a friendly reminder, we have the CAASPP and LPAC manuals page. So anytime you need to resort back to any manuals, anything of that nature, definitely feel free to use that. We've updated some of the, not the manuals, but how you search through them as well. So you can actually search for keywords within the manuals if you're looking for anything specific. It is not allowing me to, let me stop share real quick and one more time. Sorry about that, one moment. Back here. Sorry about that. It's not allowing me to get the slideshow going. Let me just go manually through this here. Okay. Let me know when you can see that again, and I'll start from the current slide.
We got you up. We can see it now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we have also our LEA CAASPP and LPAC coordinator support. So anytime the LEA CAASPP or LPAC coordinators need direct support regarding any questions, we have our Get Answers with our chatbot, Anita. We update that pretty frequently regarding any keywords that are being used or any key information that needs to be utilized. Definitely use the chatbot there. Feel free to contact any of our California technical assistance agents at Caltech here as well. And then if you need to get to us directly, I'm representative of Region 3 and Region 11. So I focus mainly on Region 11. So Region 11 at ets.org is my preferred method. And many of you who have communicated with me in the past definitely know that email is the fastest method of correspondence you can reach me at. You can also reach me via phone at the 800-955-2954 number, and then by selecting Region 11 when prompted. it'll take you directly to me. If I'm working with another LAA coordinator, please feel free to leave a message and I will call back and return that voicemail for you. So just a few reminders for CAASPP. So any users that are administering the alternate assessment for ELA math or science, just please make sure that you've completed that CAA examiner tutorial and obtained the certificate as well prior to administration. Users who will be administering the alternate assessments, just make sure that when you set them with the role, whether it be the LA coordinator or the site coordinator, that they have the test examiner role. That's going to give them access to all the assessments across the board, including the alternate. When they're giving just the test administrator role, they're only going to have access to just the general summative assessments, not any of the alternates. So just make sure that you're giving them that proper test examiner role, and that is going to give them all access to all the assessments. So this is for the interim, not the interim, excuse me, the initial LPAC and the current summative LPAC that's happening right now. If there's any demographic information that needs to be updated, please make sure that you're working with your CalPADS administrator to update that information either as frequently as possible or prior to administration. It takes some time to get through our system. So when your CalPADS administrator does an update, typically from CalPADS to TOMS, it's 24 hours. And then from when it's established in TOMS in the student profile to the actual test delivery system, it's an additional 24 hours. So it's typically about 24 to 48 hours for all of that information to go through. And I specifically want to point to the English language acquisition status. Students that are incoming that need to test for the initial LPAC, a lot of the time what I do see in their profile is the ELAS status and the primary language field are completely blank because they weren't updated properly from CalPADS. Those fields may have been blank or the correct code may have not been input. So just want to make sure that those are done as well.
Marcus, here's a question for
Yeah,
the chat about
sure.
students with an EL status and LPAC TOMS having accommodations that have been shown up in the test report and indicating they were not put in for the students. Can accommodations be applied to a student who has an EL, won't take the LPAC? Do they cross both systems? How might that be?
That's a great question. So they are separate systems, as we do have separate logins for LPAC and for CAASPP. So when it's applied to LPAC and the student's EO, those test settings, if they're going to be for CAASPP, they do need to log into CAASPP and either manually select and save those for the student or through a file upload. Unfortunately, they don't cross systems at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So this was, yeah, Christopher, you had a question?
Hi, yeah. I was commenting about the test settings report.
Okay.
We have some issues that students are showing up having accommodations that weren't assigned accommodations in the report.
Okay. Is it specifically for LPAC that they're showing up that they have test settings that weren't applied?
Correct.
Okay. If you can send me a few sample SSIDs and then the specific accommodation that wasn't supposed to be applied but is appearing, and then I'll pull the test settings report as well on my end and then double check the SSIDs and check with my team here for you as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. So as we continue along with this, we do have, the thing is going back to the ELAS, I definitely want to touch base on this again. So verify and confirm the ELAS prior to the administration of the initial or the summative LPAC. So the student takes initial and they are EL, technically the TOMS will update that in CalPADS, but by any reason, if you find any information that would reclassify the student after they've taken the initial, thing is you want to make sure to file a stairs case with that, because even though you're trying to change something within CalPADS, technically what happens is when a student opens any part of the test, all of their demographic information becomes locked. So you just want to make sure that, again, if there's any ELASs that need to be updated either before the initial or for the summative LPAC, make sure you're doing that before actually administering. Because again, if you administer and come to find out this student should have been EO, or this student should have not tested for summative, its STARS case needs to be filed in order to reset the tests that have been given for that student. Just saves you a little bit of time on the STARS front. So this applies to the alternate summative LPAC and then alternate tests as well. Just note that if you have a student that is assigned an alternate assessment for LPAC, but will also be testing for the smarter summative later on, they will automatically be assigned to the CAA assessments for both LPAC and for CAASPP, because they have to have either alternate for all or general summative as for all. So please, as we're in the summative LPAC window, before your CAASPP window opens, double check before the student administers that, oh, well, they're going to need the general assessments for CAASPP, but if they've already started the alternate LPAC, they're going to automatically be assigned. You can't switch and mix and match for those tests. It's either alt for all, again, or general summative for all. So these are specific to users within TOMS and adding those users. So, and role assignments as well. So just make sure that when you're adding those users, again, you can either manually input them, or you can use a file template for those users as well. Once the user has been added, with either manually or through the file uploaded, they're going to receive 2 emails. One, it's going to have the email stating the role they've been added with. And then there's a second email that follows that contains a secure verification link that's actually highlighted in blue. One thing with these emails and when adding the users, please make sure with your IT and personnel team at the LEA level that there are no security firewalls, and then also the URLs in which those emails are sent to users. Please make sure that they're whitelisted as well. What's going to happen is it's either going to end up with their junk or spam inbox, or I've even seen at times where the security firewall will actually quarantine those emails at the LEA level server, and it won't send even to the junk and spam inbox for users. So please make sure that they are set, and then also they are whitelisted as well when you're adding those users, so that they can receive the appropriate emails in the correct inboxes. And then here's a big one that I like to go over typically with every year, is just making sure that the login procedures for the users have been followed. Once they've been assigned that role, please make sure, and the email is going to prompt them to do so, please make sure that they are logging into TOMS and not just stopping at the login creation. Make sure that they log all the way into TOMS directly, because what's going to happen is a lot of the time the users will stop just at the login and creating their passwords, and then when it comes time to administer, they end up accessing the TA interface, and what happens is they only have the interim LPAC or the interim assessments available to them, and not the summative and or the smarter summative either. And it's because they didn't complete those forms. They need to make sure that they're completing it and then allowing at least 30 to 60 minutes so that our system can catch up and confirm that they've completed those required security forms as well. And then on the next page, I'll show you how you can actually verify and confirm the users have completed those forms as well. So it's under the report section, and it's under the list of LEA reports. It should be titled Security Forms and Remote Administration Status Report, and that's in TOMS. So this is just a couple of screenshots of what that's going to look like for you when you log in. Oops, sorry. So you're going to be locating that report under the list of available reports. And then this is what it's going to look like. It's once you request that report for the current administration year, this is a screen representation of what that's going to look like. It's going to queue up under your requested reports. The status, once it becomes available, that blue download button will become available. And then when you download that, it'll show you a spreadsheet, and it'll look something like this. So based on the role that you've given the user, you're actually going to see whether they've signed the agreement, the affidavit, or both. Typically, it's both if you're an LEA coordinator, and then it's the affidavit if it's a site coordinator and the roles below. You'll actually see the date and the time in which that was signed. If it shows as blank, that's indicative of the user not logging all the way through TOMS and actually completing those required forms. So you just want to make sure that they're doing that as well prior to administration. And again, since we're in the summative LPAC window, just ensuring that the demographic information has been uploaded from CalPads, at least the minimum of 24 to 48 hours. I go on the latter side of that, 48 hours prior to testing. And remember, these updates do not typically take place during the weekend. So if you're uploading on a Friday evening and expecting to test a student on Monday morning when school resumes, typically it's not going to be updated till at least later Tuesday, if not early morning on Wednesday. So just be aware of that as well, that CalPads updates typically take place during business hours and not weekends. Those of you who have done so already, the students K through 2, those will require answer booklets. So if you haven't placed your summative order, feel free to do so and place the supplemental order this time as the primary window has closed. And grades 3 typically test 3 through 12 test all online unless you've actually placed a request for paper pencil forms for those grade levels. The summative LPAC DFAs are currently available in TOMS at this time. Now, here's something to note as well as far as the pre-ID labels. I've gotten a few questions for some LEAs asking when they're going to become available or if they need to order them. So these are the 2 pre-production dates for the pre-ID labels, January 13th and March 10th. Any students that were included before the January 13th date or on that date are going to be in the first pre-ID order, which is shipping currently now at this time to many of the LEAs. Those that are created on January 13th, you receive those, probably already started receiving those February 3rd. And then those created on the second date, which is March 10th, you're going to start receiving those pre-ID labels on the 31st. Any students enrolled after that last production date of March 10th most likely will not have pre-ID labels if they weren't included. And you'll need to mark the student demographic information by hand bubbling that in. So just so you're aware. Now, here's what I was referring to in the beginning as far as demographic information. So you're probably wondering why I make such an emphasis on demographic information, because it's really important as far as being able to test the student accurately and also avoiding future stairs cases if a student, accidentally is tested for an initial or summative when they should have been, another ELAS other than TBD or EL, if they regain a reclassification prior to the testing. So very important that the demographic information is updated often and as soon as possible in working with your CalPads administrator. And again, those updates, make sure that they're done 24 to 48 hours in advance. And if it can be helped, not during weekend hours or prior to a weekend hours. It's usually business hours. So this is specific to both CAASPP and LPAC for accommodations. If they require any accommodations, please make sure that the CalPad special education field in TOMS reflects yes, and that special education for testing reflects yes. This can be done through CalPads, and then that is then translated to TOMS. And once we receive that update from CalPad. So again, a lot of this information is coming from CalPad. So definitely establish a good working relationship with your CalPads administrator, as they are responsible for a lot of this demographic information populating in TOMS. This is just a brief overview of starting a test session. We have some information here, and I can go ahead and post that in the chat as well. So that's typically an overview of that test administrator interface and what it's going to look like for the interface as well. So as Stephen had mentioned as well in the presentation regarding checking the test settings prior to approval, you can always look for the eye or the eyeball icon, which we kind of explain it as is, to verify those test settings. So if a student shows test settings and they've been uploaded at least, I believe, 24 hours prior to the actual administration of the test, what should happen is the TA needs to verify those settings before approval. And I've included a screenshot of that in the next slide as well. So I apologize, it's a little bit out of focus, but this C detail section here, this is what they should be looking for, what's circled in the red, and they should be able to verify that prior. The last thing you want to have to happen is they approve all the students for a test, and then the student raises their hand and tells the TA, hey, you know, I'm not seeing this specific test setting for me. They've already gone to the test. So what's going to happen is that typically results in a stairs case because the students started that test without verifying the test settings first. And then a stairs has to be filed by either the site coordinator or the LEA coordinator. So please feel free to share this with your test administrators. Make sure they are checking the eyeball icon prior to approval of the assessment, whether it be for LPAC or for Smarter Balanced. Let's see. So just want a brief overview of this as far as ICAs themselves, because I know some LEAs are still using them in preparation for the summative. When it comes to an interim comprehensive assessment, please make sure that both the computer test and the performance task has to be completed. In addition to that, the performance task must be hand scored and marked as complete in order for the score data to appear in SIRS for that student for that particular test. And then for TAs that need to view that score data from an interim assessment given, please make sure that either the site coordinator or the LEA coordinator is creating those student groups and uploading them in SIRS so that when the TAs log in or the site coordinators log in, they actually see the groups listed on that homepage in SIRS. So just make sure that's done prior, because if they try to log in and they see 0 groups assigned, it's a pretty clear indication that no groups have been uploaded for those users yet. This goes back to the teacher hand scoring as well. So this is specific to LPAC. So if the test examiner, and this is for the initial LPAC, enters the scores into the teacher hand scoring system after the students have completed the writing test in the TDS for the grades 3 to 12, they have to make sure that they're going into those and marking as complete. And then they should be able to click submit on the bottom of that THSS as well. So please make sure that they're doing that as well, specifically for the writing test for grades 3 through 12. That requires that to be hand scored in order for data to populate. Upcoming for LPAC. Currently, the summative LPAC testing window, it has open on February 1st. And again, it's going to close on May 31st. So just be aware to try to get all of your LPAC testing done before that deadline, please. Now, since the primary window has ended specifically for the K through 2 materials, supplemental LPAC materials still can be placed at this time, and they're available through May 10th. Please be aware when you place a summative, the summative supplemental order window, it's going to take about 10 to 14 business days after the order has been placed in order to arrive to your LEA. So please allot for that time as well. I'm going to look into the chat real quick because I'm sure some of those questions are there as well. Any questions?
I think we just have a continuation of the original question about the accommodations we're showing up. I think you're gonna get some NSSID to look into the specific ones and some recommendations. Then there was a question from Michelle, I believe. Sorry, lost in the chat here in 1 second. Related to last year, the CAASPP accommodations were uploaded, invalidated the ELPAC accommodations, so we had to enter them again. Didn't you, Marcus, just say the ELPAC and CAASPP systems were separate? We want to avoid the issue we had last year. Is there any communication between the two that might be conflicts?
As far as I know, no. I do see Michelle's question regarding that. I am not aware that CAASPP accommodations were uploaded invalid the LPAC side. As far as I know, they are separate systems, so I'm not sure if there's any example of that from last year. I definitely would love to let my team know about that. But I've never heard or any other LEAs reporting the CAASPP accommodations overwrote or invalidated LPAC accommodations. So that's interesting that occurred. I'm sorry it did occur. That's
Shelley said Marcus, your details. A couple more questions. Christopher has a student
Sure,
with
yeah.
multiple identifiers. So there it is, and they have a new SSID, so now Tom's is showing the student needs the initial LPAC, but they are already an English learner in their student score, and their student score report is at Tom's. He tried completing the stair report to fix the SSID issue, but it was rejected. What are the next steps to the new initial LPAC? We are moved more data to show completed.
Okay, was this a student with multiple SSIDs and tested on their
Yeah,
initial?
Yeah. They
Okay.
already have, under one,
So-
they already had.
Sure. So typically what happens in that situation is, so if a student is given one SSID, they complete all the initial LPAC, they receive the EL designation, but they receive an updated, or their SSID is retired, and then the new SSID is given to the student. What happens is, we've actually worked on this, it's automatically remapped to the new SSID. Unfortunately, there's not a timeline in which the old scores from the old and now retired SSID transferred to the new SSID. I've known it taking up to a few weeks, but there's not any defined timeline, unfortunately, on that. And stairs wouldn't be needed in that specific case because it automatically remaps. So you just want to make sure in that particular instance that the student completes all of the domains on the old SSID. The old SSID is then retired and a new one is generated and given to the student. All of the old score data will then transfer to the new SSID.
Marcus?
Yeah.
I believe the scenario described is slightly distinct from that, in that the student already tested with the initial
Okay.
already has an EL on one SSID, then went to a new district, got a SSID without an EL status. I was determined to qualify as a TBD for initial LPAC, took the initial, was not aware of the prior EL classification. Do they need to stairs report after they realize that the student had another SSID and prior EL classification, prior identification of initial? Do they need to stairs report the mistakenly administered initial L on the new SSID? Is that distinction, am I being clear on that?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So if they had a new SSID that showed that they needed to be tested for the initial, even though they were EL in the prior LEA, see, the problem is it's across different LEAs as far as the ELAS. So I would definitely reach out to the success agent, because we'd have to, that's more of a specified case regarding that. But if the new LEA and the new SSID issued and the student, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm hearing some stuff in the background, so I'm not sure if somebody's trying to talk or.
Like, must be unmuted. Christopher added, the score data has already been transferred, the school's getting an overdue initial LPAC testing notice though, so the score data did transfer, they didn't take the initial, sounds like. Should we still just wait for an update? Or reach out? I said reach out.
Yeah, I would reach out on that, because it's a specific case regarding 2 LEAs. So I would have to double check to see why the new LEA with the new SSID is receiving that, even though they've tested, because technically score data should follow the student to the LEA, and it still should be remapped even with the new SSID being issued. I had a couple cases like this last administration year, so definitely feel free to reach out to me and we can look into that.
I'm gonna call a hard stop because my whole team have to run off to, the DA Charter Symposium, Marcus, but we appreciate
Sure.
your joined us, and I know there are any unanswered questions in the chat, we'll make sure we include responses as a follow-up, and we will link your presentation in the chat, and if people are asking about that, is always welcome. And thank you for joining us again. Sorry to rush off, but it's always great to have the conversation and the questions that come in. So that coming. I hope everybody has a nice, hopefully dry and event-free rest of your week. And we will see you at our next stand meeting. Actually, let me plug real quick, the Wednesdays at 1 is starting next week, Stephen,
That's right, the 7th.
on the 7th. That is tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. Yeah.
Wednesdays at 1, if you want a casual, laid back, tie-free experience of Wednesdays at 1, make sure you put the link for that in the chat, but we'd love to see you there as well. Take care, everybody.
And then if I can add one more thing, we have office hours that are going till about 3 p.m. today. So I will be on the office hours as well if anybody needs assistance, but many more of our other staff and ETS will be there as well for you.
All right, thank you, Marcus.
Mm-hmm.
Take care.